Anytime you need to chime in, just let me know if you want to say anything. So obviously your meeting as well, or ask any questions or anything like that. Pretty nice write-up. I don't know who did the copy on the forum write-up.
That would be Tina and Elizabeth's work.
Good job, guys. Well written. I almost feel like just reading your script. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Welcome, everybody. You are watching the March 10th, 2021 Wildfire Forum, and you have assembled with you city staff, city councilors. I'm your mayor, Julie Akins, and Adam Hanks is here, our city manager pro tem. He'll be introducing us to staff to talk about this wildfire forum. We have Tina Gray, our human resources manager, who helped put this together, and Elizabeth Taylor, who will be helping us organize questions throughout the evening. We welcome your input and your questions and your thoughts as we go through the evening. I think it bears repeating, and it was written on the website, very well written, thank you. Lessons learned from the Alameda fire will help shape the city's response to emergencies in the future and better define areas of vulnerability. It's not enough to know what did not work as expected. This event must become a springboard to creating a more resilient community that can withstand and recover more quickly from disaster by implementing operational, structural, and policy changes. Wonderfully said, and we hope to go through the evening and learn more about all the ways that we can work together in the next, should the next wildfire come. And we know with climate crisis, it's kind of a, it's not really an if, but a when. So we need to be prepared, and we're glad that you are here to join us and help us put our heads together and brainstorm best practices. And with that, I will kick it over to City Manager Pro Tem Adam Hanks, who will introduce us to staff and bring us up to date on where we are now. And then please, those of you who are standing by and watching this at home, hang in there. We are going to come to you and have your questions and get those answered as best we can throughout the evening. And thank you, Council, for being here. I think it would be rude to not introduce. We have Stephanie Seffinger, Councilor. We have Paula Hyatt, your Councilor. We have Gina Duquesne, your Councilor. Sean Moran, also your Councilor. And Tonya Graham is here as well. So, and there she is. So welcome, everyone. And Adam, I'll go ahead and leave it to you.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So this event, as you hit the opening remarks, the intention of this event that Council has been talking about putting together for a bit now, we've finally been able to pull it all together and have the meeting. We had a couple different date issues, or it would have been a little bit earlier on in the calendar, had some conflicts. Maybe before I get started on the rest of it, well, let me just kind of go at what we think the layout is, and we'll you know, we've got some flex in the layout, but the mayor and I kind of went through what we think is a decent structure, and then we'll see how it goes from there. But we have, of course, the welcoming opening remarks, and then the goal is to have a staff presentation, a couple different elements of that presentation. Tina Gray will go over the online survey results that we did in November, and I think presented to Council either at the end of November or beginning of December. One of our largest online survey responses we've ever had, and Tina has a PowerPoint that we'll summarize. We won't go into all the detail of it because we will have it on the website, or has been, and will again be on the website for everyone to check out. But that, I think, will set the stage for what we heard on the more immediate responses to that survey. We'll step in and I'll run through kind of nearly a top 10 takeaways from that, and what we're actively working on as staff and commission and community level. And I'll try and rip through that myself. And then we'll transition over to Chris Chambers and Katie Gibble, who really head up our wildfire division within our fire department. Chris Chambers is the division chief for that, and Katie Gibble does our Firewise, and also helps staff our Wildfire Safety Commission. So those will be the three kind of presentation pieces, and all throughout this, the Q&A tool is open for individual attendees to absorb, and whenever a question pops in your head, you can go into that Q&A piece and add that, and Elizabeth on our staff will assist Mayor Akins and I with kind of sorting and filtering, and if we have similar questions, we'll try and group them and get to everybody's questions as best we can. And with that Q&A session, when we answer questions, we do have our roster of several of our key department heads that have major roles and responsibilities on this topic for evacuation, communication, and many other elements of our EOC. So we will bring on that whole cadre of department head experts when we get to the Q&A section. And before I take off on that or hand that over to Tina, Elizabeth, any particulars that we need to talk about on the Q&A tool, or was that adequate, do we think?
I think that's adequate. If you can see it at the very bottom of your screen and just type a question there and it will get to us. One more thing I would add, we are recording this forum, so it will be posted online later along with the debrief. So look for that.
Thank you. Good add. And then one more piece that reminded me of, we're also going to take all the questions and answers and turn that into an FAQ sheet that'll go along with that, and we'll post that as well. And if we end up with more questions than we can answer in this 6 to 8 p.m. time slot, we'll mark those a little differently on the FAQ, but we will then kind of offline try and answer those questions as well and put those on as well. So even if we don't happen to get to every question within this forum time slot, we will get answers and post answers to all of those. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tina Gray, who is much more than our HR director. She helps with a lot of administration, large projects, community, internal and external, and she handled some of our internal after action review for our Emergency Operations Center, and also did this online survey that we can get a presentation on.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see. For some reason, my presentation is not, there we go. Okay. Okay. So as we mentioned, we're going to pare this down in the interest of time tonight, but I cannot overstate enough how much we appreciate the incredible input from the community. As Adam mentioned, this was one of the largest responses we've had on our website tool, and we hope that that will continue to grow. Of course, this particular process, we had COVID, which made meetings difficult, and so this was a valuable tool for us to get that public engagement piece. We did have 534 responses, and it took me weeks to go through and kind of pull out common themes from the response. The survey itself was up in October, and since our response was primarily communicating about the emergency and then the evacuation, that was what we focused on in the survey. The key piece of the key communication tool that the city used was our Nixle online alert system, but we also learned from the survey the other communication tools that were used because of the lack of information. People were reaching out to various sources. Police scanners were mentioned quite frequently, and Pulse Point for up to the minute information is what the community, and Nextdoor was a popular. So everybody was turning to every possible outlet to get information. As far as lessons learned from the city, one of the key pieces we learned on the notification, initially some of our notification language was confusing or ambiguous, and so we've learned to clean that up and be very specific and direct. When we referenced Quiet Village, for example, some of the newer residents weren't familiar and didn't know quite what Quiet Village entailed. So that was a great, valuable learning lesson for us to in our communication style, how to approach that differently. Can't see part of my screen. In terms of the emergency siren, that was one of the most common threads that we heard from the community, is that notification in this instance was, time sensitive and critical. The community would like to see some other venue of communication similar to a Siren system like we use for the Hostler Dam. Also mentioned quite frequently was some sort of synchronized, even if we were doing something basic like church bells or some community activation like that could be used to alert citizens. One other piece that we noted in the survey is that phone service in Ashland in some areas is a little dicey on a good time. And then with phone lines jammed in an emergency, it was even more critical. So we need to consider that in our communication during an emergency. Folks also noted that Nixle, Facebook, and Twitter were useless in those areas that had no communication by cell phone. So that helps us going forward to shape our response and think of different tools and mechanisms that we can use to reach out to the public. Update. That was one of the most frequently stated concerns of the community is after the initial response, it moved out of Ashland, but people still needed information. The frequent comment was even evacuees need information as well. So though we were directly communicating with people who needed to get out of the area, that it would have helped a lot to also tell people to shelter in place and not clog up the roads or be looky-loos and interfere with the response. So we learned that over communicating is much better than not providing enough during an emergency situation. Some of the takeaways as well was to provide a faster initial notification and then follow up with continual alerts and updates. Part of the problem with Nixle is this emergency was so fast moving that it didn't keep up. And so people were turning to other sources such as Pulse Point and using police scanners. That was what people were following in the early part of the emergency, more so than some of Ashland's messaging. The other piece that we'll be looking into, people felt that everyone in that emergency evacuation zone needed to have some sort of an alert, such as an Amber Alert type system. The opt-in program is great, but in a significant emergency or disaster, that's not acceptable. We have new people moving in, we have a lot of tourists and people visiting that may have been in that zone and had no idea about how to opt into Nixle. Another piece was businesses. We have a lot of employees working downtown. So keeping the business community engaged in the emergency response as well, so they can keep their employees and their families updated. Nixle alerts, if we could possibly look into a way to make them more distinct. People are sort of in an over text world, and some people didn't even notice the Nixle alert separate from their incoming text. Let's see here. Another key takeaway in this particular case, disasters don't know city limits and borders. And so this valley is so much a region that people live and work in different communities and so there's a lot of travel back and forth, kids are in school. And so even though this touched Ashland initially, it touched the whole valley. And then as it grew, of course it did. So everybody in the valley needed to know information at the same time. With that improved coordination with the county, the sentiment of the community was that we either need one location regionally where information is sent and updated, or the same information needs to be disseminated so that everybody's on the same page in all the county communities. Having more context to the scope of the emergency, a lot of people just didn't even realize after it left Ashland that it was still continuing on. And so that continued messaging would have been critical in this instance. Again, more public information or public education is needed on evacuation so that there's repetition of the message because of the nature of having college students and people moving in and out of the community. That continual messaging, even though locals might get tired of hearing it, it's critical to keep new individuals moving into the community apprised of the evacuation process. Consider dividing the community into evacuation zones was the common thread or theme in the survey. Each resident needs to know where to go based on the type of emergency. Again, training the public on what the different evacuation levels mean. A lot of folks said they didn't understand the difference between level 2, level 1, that it was very, very confusing for them. So education on what those types of responses require. Signs in the community were also recommended to direct evacuation traffic. Again, better coordination and communication on the ground. In this case, the recommendation was to have training volunteers at intersections. It sounded like it got very confusing on the ground for people trying to get out, and the people that were guiding traffic didn't necessarily have updated information. And so if we could use volunteers in a different way as a source of communication. Again, neighborhood preparedness plans. Again, this falls in with CERT and some of the programs that the city has already been working on. We can continue to use those venues to educate people on evacuations. Coordinated communication plan was also referenced multiple times. A lot of residents don't have cell phones. A lot of folks are not on the computer all the time. And so factoring in all those different types of citizens that how they might access their information would be key for the city in terms of preparing going forward. And again, keeping our communication clear and simple. That was a very common thread. A lot of concern was among the community was why the emergency broadcast system was not activated. So that's something that we can certainly look into. People were very frustrated that programming was just going on as usual during a very, very devastating time in our valley. And then again, I-5 traffic, not rerouting it through Ashland, creating gridlock at a time when we're trying to evacuate. That created a lot of fear and anxiety for residents. A lot of folks referenced the road diet, and for the city to consider the impacts of the road diet on capacity for evacuation. Public education and planning so that we plan ahead and people know what to take and where to go. Again, continuing CERT training in the neighborhoods. Folks really felt like this is a grassroots effort, that there's a lot of interest in the community in becoming more prepared and becoming part of the evacuation process. Door-to-door communication would have been appreciated. Not everyone received that other than just time to go type of notification. Suggested use of loudspeakers or megaphones during evacuations to reach everyone. And then AFN, apparently there were some areas that didn't have AFN available, and that was a concern for folks to get information. Again, just touching on the common thread that communication was confusing or conflicting. Some people reported having a go now notification, and then they got turned back at the end of their road. And then the media outlets were telling people to go to the expo, but then the people couldn't get there. And so a more coordinated approach to evacuation would have simplified that. A lot of people reported not being able to get information once they did evacuate on when it was safe to come back and how to get here, since roads were blocked and changed at that point. We had Nixle voicemail messages that went out to folks, and people reported that they came off as garbled or confusing, and some of the terminology was not understandable. So if we can work on making those more clear and concise, particularly a lot of people said even the locals don't know the freeway exit numbers. So those are things that we'll consider going forward in our messaging. Whoops. Alternate routes for evacuation. People kind of knew their own plan for their family, but with the way the fire happened, and it sort of rerouted their plans. And so having that alternate route mapped out and planned would have been helpful for this emergency. Improved emergency notification for anyone in the zone. We talked about previously. Train and educate on an inclusive evacuation plan. A lot of folks were really worried or concerned about their neighbors or people who they knew were working or that had kids at home or pets at home that had no way to get out. And so an inclusive plan that considers the disabled or seniors that might struggle to evacuate. Some suggestions were to create evacuation maps that are accessible to the public online. Again, better traffic control in the emergency zone. Establish more evacuation routes, even primitive emergency only access. And then again, the road diet was a topic. Coordinate within the region on emergency planning, including county, ODOT, any of those agencies that would be involved. We need to coordinate our communications so that we know what they're doing and they know what we're doing, and it's all a more coordinated approach. Again, planning for all scenarios. And we have done this in our EOC, but never really layered on the different challenges that we encountered in this, in the middle of a pandemic with loss of electricity and all of those compiled. And so I think that would be useful in our training to consider all those various scenarios that could happen. Again, for the council to consider not approving new subdivisions unless the impact on evacuation is a factor in that decision. And we ask if there was any additional information, and this was kind of a summarized version. People appreciated the survey, that it was a great start, but continue the education in the community and involve the community in creating the plan and enacting the plan. Better fuel management and weed control. People were open to having tougher ordinances if that's what's necessary to accomplish that. The issue of homelessness came up, to provide a place so that people are not camping along the greenway and in the watershed during high fire risk times. Consider expanding AFN so that all residents have better internet access. Again, early warning and proactive measures. People, if they would have known in advance the wind conditions and kind of the perfect storm of fire conditions that were coming down the pike a couple of days earlier, people may have taken proactive measures. A lot of mentioning of resolving funding issues and making that a top priority for our fire department to be funded. And then again, more needs to be done about water shortages during the fire season. So that was kind of a lot of information compiled into a short amount of time. So I apologize for going through that so fast, but as we mentioned, we'll have the full survey available.
Well, thank you very much, Tina Gray, for presenting that. You did a great job of rushing through that. And I know there was a lot there and a lot of information, and you've provided that online and will continue to, and we appreciate it very much. A lot of good suggestions in there that I think many of us have heard before and we'll be talking about throughout the evening. We'll get to some of your questions here shortly, but I'm going to kick back to Adam to give us a few more comments prior to taking any questions.
Sure. Yeah, I just wanted to hit a couple of high notes, and then maybe before we get to the takeaways part, like you would, if you want to take some of those questions, that'd be great. That might have been triggered by Tina's report. So a couple of things about the report. That those are those were all citizen input, citizen affected issues. And I just want to hit a couple bullets that I wrote down kind of on the fly while that was going on, that triggered in my mind as she was going through those. When we're talking both locally and with our regional partners, we have to recognize when we plan for these things differently on local emergencies that are contained within our boundaries that we're in charge of. Our local emergency operations center handles start to finish, and those that are like Alameda Fire, which was, we started up our emergency operations center, and then within several hours, it wasn't our event anymore, and it was now under the control and decision making, including decision making on communications by another entity. So we then become kind of subservient to the larger regional event. And I think by 2 a.m. that was even then went from regional to statewide, where the state fire marshal's office, the blue team they called it, came in at literally at 2 a.m. and our fire chief Shepard was there to sign the documents to turn that over to that entity to lead it. So it was a rapidly changing fire, both in terms of the kind of the pathway of destruction and impacts to everyone, and who was in charge and how it was being managed changed. So that's another thing for us for training that is different. It was a different sort of event that way. And really, as you know, all those are great suggestions, and what to do and what to work on, I think is much more easy to come to some general agreement about. The harder part is how. How those are done is probably that's the part that takes a lot of work, and there's a lot more to it, both within our local decision-making ability and within regional and state and systems beyond. So just a note to keep in mind. And two things that I learned: I was with a lot of the fire chiefs well after the event, but soon after I was able to be in the kind of evaluation of the event and immediate resolution and some of the ongoing stuff for both Open Chain and Alameda. And one of the things that kind of struck me that was repeated over and over is all the fire chiefs in this region said two things I thought were interesting. The event overwhelmed all of the local and regional available resources. I have to remember this was concurrent, nearly concurrent with fires, in up and down the I-5 corridor in Oregon, and then obviously fires that had been going on a long time in other states. So it was pretty well known that morning that there were no other resources coming, and this fire overwhelmed the existing resources. So the planning that we do and the additional work really have to recognize that we're prioritizing things because of resources available both in our local part and then as it transitions to a regional fire. And it was known early that there were quickly insufficient local and regional resources to address this magnitude of an event. And the other part that relates to that the chiefs all had said in some follow-up meetings, that it was a career-defining event for all of these fire chiefs. And these were fire chiefs that haven't just spent their career here in the Rogue Valley. They come from all over. And to every single one in that room, there were 9 fire chiefs. They all said this was a career event. They hadn't seen anything like this or experienced and worked on it. So just some background context for what this was that initially Ashland and then our rural Ashland family and then on to Talent and Phoenix were impacted by. Was a very kind of unique and not experienced before event. So before I get into the top 10 takeaways, I just want to get those points out there. And Tina really hit on a lot of the takeaways. We can hit on some more specifics on a few of those, but all of that input from the community are takeaways. We try to organize them and look at what we think when we rank them about what we already are working on, what we need to add to that, and how much we need to add to those various things. So I'll hit on that after Mary, if you'd like to take a chunk of questions first before that.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, I would. Elizabeth, can you help us out here and run through a few of these questions, and then maybe Adam or counselors can take a stab at these, and what we don't know, we'll get back to you guys on. But if you can just, I saw a few on the road diet and a few as I was going through, but the screen was jumping and I want to pay attention. So if you could help us out, Elizabeth, that'd be great. Just read a few of those off.
Of course, and I can also bring on a few other staff members if they're better to answer it as well.
That's great, thank you.
Okay, so there were a few questions about working regionally for a fire evacuation plan, so I'm going to combine these first two. How important does the city of Ashland find it to work with surrounding communities, i.e. Talent and Phoenix, in a fire evacuation plan? And is there any plan to meet or plan together with those cities? And also on that subject, is there a plan to protect property and people outside the border of Ashland and have emergency alerts included in those areas that are still Ashland zip codes?
Yep, I'll take a stab at that. You know, and again, we'll bring the rest of the department head team on maybe for the after the takeaways part, and we can add to it. Yeah, the city, all of us, the key part of the EOC team, the Emergency Operations Center team, several of us are participating in Jackson County's after action review. As you may have seen in the paper, they chose to hire a consultant, a very well-respected consultant that's done some after-action review work in LA County and in some major similar wildfire disasters. So they are going through a really formal after-action review process, and we are connected with that, as with all of the other communities that were impacted by this. They are focusing on their emergency operations center, and you know, similarly to the material that Tina went through, I think they're going to have a public piece, but it's a lot of internal work with other jurisdictions and other agencies, ODOT being a very key agency on the evacuation side, about what went right, what went wrong, what different types of coordination need to occur, both in communication, both in the physical rerouting and decision making, the tree of decision making for, you know, when and how ODOT decides what they're doing. Just a quick note is, you know, we are very connected with them as a jurisdiction. We have two, you know, exits, obviously 14 and 19, and that was those were quick decisions, and they were decisions made because the fire was active on both of their roadways, I-5 and 99. So that's you know, another piece of that puzzle. But getting back to the question is, we absolutely are coordinating with those agencies. We immediately on the recovery actively fire fought in Talent, and our public works team were there the next day and the days after to help turn off water meters to get their water system restored. So we did both immediate, and then as this question infers, yes, the communities will have integrated planning. The city of Medford is working on an evacuation plan similar to the plan that the city that we're working on, and basically when they're moving, you know, exits evacuation planning as it hits, you know, exit up to exit 24 at least in Phoenix, we are working on our exits at 19 at least, and probably, you know, into Talent. All of those need to talk and recognize that those flows are intertwined. So that is for sure happening on a number of levels. The rural Ashland zip code stuff is, you know, that's where we get to our mutual aid agreements on the fire event. We have very tight and solid mutual aid agreements with many of the regional fire districts. Primarily, our working partner is Fire District 5, the adjacent, and that occurred. What services from the city of Ashland as a government, you know, we don't directly provide services. Those are rural county addresses, and decision making is by that body. We of course have overlap there, and I think that was a lesson learned about how, you know, and I don't think we have the answers yet on how we better assist, support, or partner when there's that interface area in that rural Ashland area. So that's one that I think would be great, and maybe there's at some point later, you know, a forum or an avenue where we talk specifically with that affected group and see what we can do, and really just get the rest of it out of the way and talk really just about them.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to look and see if any counselors want to jump in before we go to the next set of questions. I want to be mindful of time and get everybody's questions answered if possible. I hope that's okay, Adam. I'm looking around, I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, do you want to, Elizabeth, do you want to give us the next set of questions?
Sure, this next one is a short one that I can probably answer. Does the city have an official low power AM or FM radio station to provide information? And yes, we do. Our fire department puts out emergency updates on 1700 AM. So you can tune into that in the future.
Great, thank you for that.
All right, and then let's go on. There's been a few questions. Oh, actually, let's start what is the road diet and what does it mean to end the road diet?
Yeah, that's similar to the Tina's comment about using quiet village as the terminology when it's not clear that everyone knows what we're talking about. Yeah, the road diet there's several road diets actually along Highway 99. Our local road diet is we're on probably 7 years ago or so, 6 or 7 years ago, where our previously 4-lane two-way Highway 99 section that's inside the city limits of Ashland. So basically at the north end of the plaza, Bard's Inn, all the way out to roughly the railroad overpass where Ashland Mine Road goes. That's the city limits portion of Highway 99 that we call North Main Street. That was with a lot of public involvement and a lot of support and detractors, converted 6 or 7 years ago into a 1 lane each way with a center turn lane that then provided the incorporation of bike lanes, and also had several safety improvements for realignment of intersections, most notably at Weimer, which was a dangerous one. So that's the road diet. There's been a lot of talk, both immediately after and lingering about that, and I think that clearly is something that we have in an after action takeaway, is to to talk about what that does and doesn't accomplish, what our options are to handle that better. I think the different emergency events would lend itself to different challenges and problems with the potential problems with the road diet. The curb to curb width of that road has never changed, road diet or not. It's still as wide as it always was. It's just different paint configurations. So there are ways in less immediate and severe evacuation events where, and we do it on scheduled events, 4th of July, where we take 3 lanes one direction and 1 lane the other. And we can, there are some strategies and maybe some operating changes that we need to do to be ready to make that switch quicker. That reminds me of just a quick note. Our former fire chief, Dave Shepard, he described both to us internally and in a meeting that I was at, the difference between fleeing and evacuation. And that's something that we need to, it is worth keeping in mind. In some of these situations, we are talking about fleeing rather than evacuation. So evacuations sometimes give way to fleeing. And that's just a nugget for later as well. But the road diet is something that in that section of Highway 99, the city council, and it's a local decision about how we stripe and manage that section. But more to be said on that as we go along, because there was a ton of content or comment about that, and some of it, that I think are pretty easily addressed, and some of it are a little stickier.
Thank you. I think that's a valid point that you make. It's paint on the road. It can be changed, expanded, depending on the emergency. So I appreciate that insight. Elizabeth, do you want to grab a few more questions here before we?
Sure. Going kind of back to the regionalization, someone asked, what sort of connectivity between Ashland, other cities, Jackson County is there regarding the various reviews, analysis, and recommended changes? And then there's also a question about anticipated timing for this review and discussion and implementing any new protocols.
Yeah, I'm not totally certain on the exact timeline for Jackson counties. We have supplied all of our after action review information to them. We had a conference or a Zoom call with their consultant, with all of us 3 weeks ago, actually 3 weeks ago today. So they took all that down, and there'll undoubtedly be some follow-up. They are doing both events. Jackson County EOC, as another reminder, we're doing double duty on two significant events, Open Chain and Alameda. So they were doubly stretched. So their after action review encompasses both events. I would assume that would be coming at earliest fall. with their final review and assessment. I would add that they are actively engaging in enhancing their emergency management staffing levels. There's currently positions that they are filling. County Administrator Danny Jordan has been really great about including, us in all of this work. I don't know, what the outcome will be. Some of these things are county only functions. So they're wrestling with things that we defer to them, including that Amber Alert or that notification, the broader notification system. There's very strict rules about who even is the right entity to, or the legal entity to attach to that and activate that. So super important work, and we're glad to be attached with it. And I think so is Talent in Phoenix, which I think will help our coordination.
Okay, anything else we want to take on or do? Let's take a little break from questions. We have, right now there are 108 participants and 29 questions, and I think we've hit a few of them, but we're going to do our best to get to everybody. So thank you all for your participation. Adam, you had a little bit more you wanted to do, and then we were going to introduce some other staff. Is that correct?
Yeah, and that's really for, they can hit a few high notes if we want, or just be ready to have a different voice and more specific answers to some of the questions. I'm going to actually whiz through these even faster than I was anticipating, because we've hit on a lot of this actually already. But the summary of the takeaways from the staffing perspective and what we're working on. Number one was regional collaboration. Just got finished talking with that. The new emergency management staffing at Jackson County, their after action review process. Another one is expanded, increased different types of regional training across the core functions, not just the fire departments work training with fire departments, but really having that whole cross section of emergency management training. That I think there'll be some more opportunities to do that on a larger level to really look at how we do those baton handoffs we've been talking about. Number two is communication. This one, any topic, communication is always on the list. Improving this. I believe Chris Chambers, it really leads up our communications, emergency communications efforts as well. He wears multiple hats for us. We went from, I think, around 7,500 to 8,000 registered Nixle users to over 15,000 within the first 24 to 36 hours of the Alameda event. So we gained a huge number of participants in that system. We are, as that matures, that's a few years old for us, year and a half maybe, two probably. As that matures, we will be, utilizing that, kind of having more structure and more protocol to how it's used. We have more hours and more usage under our belt and a much larger user base. So that is still a focus area of us, for us is how we use Nixle. And again, Chris, when he pops on here later, we can get into more detail. Tina mentioned some of the messaging. It sounds straightforward, but it's really hard to do a 15-word or less text that tells people what they need. And that's something that additional training and just additional comfort level to do that, and who does that and when. And one of the things that I hit on a little bit is whose information is it? There's a point at which we are relaying information. It isn't our information to share, it's others. It becomes a regional event, and how we do that, and then what we shift to while we're not in charge of that content. What's the background content that we are owners of? So I think there's layers of that we'll work on. Emergency notification, that's been brought up a couple of times. The additional outlets or different ways to do a mass notification on kind of the Siren scale. There's lots of cons or problems with a Siren type thing, and we'll get into that later when we really bring things back to council. Is what are the pros and cons of that, and what does that message convey? Fires are pretty specific depending upon where they start. So sirens could give a very muddled message. What do you do when you hear that? That's the problem with in an event that it impacts the entire city equally. Sirens are great, or impacts a region. Every time X happens, the siren tells you to do Y. Fires have a little more variables. Evacuations, Ty O'Meara, our police chief, will be able to talk a little bit more about this, but we have an evacuation study underway. We had this going before Almeda from a grant that our fire department was able to obtain. That the results of that will be coming really soon, month or two, which gives us some, exactly as someone suggested in the survey, breaking into zones. Providing better, more discreet methodology about and information sharing for neighborhood by neighborhood about what to do and how to do it, which will likely lead to other things relating to evacuation preparedness, signage, the potential temporary or emergency road connectors, or even the potential for future capital improvements to make road connections specifically for or primarily for evacuation purposes. Let's see. Also evacuation, the study may not hit on this directly, but a piece that we need to work on is evacuation planning, incorporating the needs of residents who are disabled, who don't otherwise have transportation, group transportation, or and that's a region-wide thing. In meetings that I've been in, RVTD is an asset. They're quite a critical player in the regional system. Our little kind of microbus system that connects to that could be a very useful component of that. So that was an identified piece that we need to work on. One that came up a lot and that sounds easy, but is also pretty quickly acknowledged is really hard, is emergency exits to I-5. That has state and federal obstacles or issues to work through. Soon after the fire, the original follow-up meeting with our U.S. senators, then former Mayor Stromberg and I went to a meeting, and we talked with Senator Wyden and Merkley about exactly that, saying we're going to continue. We want to push for that or something similar, something that more quickly alleviates the challenges that we pretty quickly faced there. And Scott Fleury, our Public Works Director, continues to work on that one, and through ODOT and the federal system to see about making that happen. I think it's we don't know yet about the viability. I think there's a need, and then we'll figure out the viability as we move forward. I'll skip on that one. The weed abatement is one that has kind of long been an issue. Weed abatement in our interface area. We are working with the Rogue Valley Fire Chiefs Association and with staff, with County Commissioner Danny Jordan, to try and craft something that gives some enhanced abilities to have some vegetation reduction, weed abatement happening in the interface areas to urbanized communities, to provide another layer there that we don't currently have controls over. And then we've also implemented through Chris Chambers leading the charge for us internally as a multi-department vegetation team. And we have 2 or 3 different departments or divisions in the city that have some role in city weed abatement and fuels reduction. We pulled that group together and said, okay, what can we accomplish both just internal with our staff and combining funding mechanisms to enhance that. So we're looking at at a different level of vegetation management and fuels reduction than we probably historically have had on city and parks properties. And then the last one I put on here, and I kind of added this one, is stick with it for the long haul. That's a challenge always, is that we need to maintain focus on this topic, emergency preparedness in general, but fire specifically. This is clearly, as Mayor Aiken said in the opening, this is clearly not something that's in our rearview mirror. This is something that we will be facing as potential. I think that's just part of our backdrop now, and probably has been for longer than we would want to have admitted. But that's just kind of the what we're trying to do internally. And I know council and I know many community interested advocates and participants are wanting to do as well, is not let this have high attention and drop. We need to create programs and do things that respond to what we learned, but also maintain over time and keep evaluating the changing landscape that we see.
Agreed.
That's it.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Thank you for a lot of information there. I think it bears noting that we're answering these questions on the fly, and City Manager Pro Tem Adam Hanks has just got it right there. That's kind of impressive. Thank you. I'm wondering if we can bring in, is Chief Ty O'Meara available? There were some questions about the cause of the fire that might be helpful, as well as, is that okay, Adam?
Sure. I was just going to, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just going to suggest maybe we bring in the team, just so we bring them all in and we don't have to juke back and forth. We have Police Chief Ty O'Meara, our Fire Chief, Interim Fire Chief Ralph Sartain, Wildfire Division Chief Chris Chambers, Katie Gibble is going to present a fire department as well, with Chris. And who am I missing? Scott Fleury, our Public Works Director, are our key emergency operations people. Now, I'll say that in different emergencies, we have a full team. All of our department head team participates in our EOC. Mike Morrison, our Public Works Superintendent, is also available, who was on the ground, at our wastewater plant, right where the origins, and is a key piece. But we have a big structure. We have an emergency operations plan, and we convene our emergency operations center under these events. And for this event, it brought this expert crew with us, but we have others that do different functions within our EOC. For Karen Shelter, Michael Black, our Parks Director, handles that area. We have planning and logistics. We have a full-blown EOC team, but this is the team for expert answers to what we think are tonight's questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for being here. For those of you watching at home and or will be watching this recording, and those of you on the Zoom call, you kind of got your whole power team here, guys. So if there's any question, now's the time, because they're all assembled in one place. Gosh, let's hope there's not an emergency tonight. Of course, we could really fly out of here fast, I imagine. I don't know if we want to, Adam, if we want to just go to some more questions. I had some questions that already came up and have come up recently, and I thought maybe Chief O'Meara could jump in and answer those, if that's okay. Two of them on there. One was regarding the cause of the fire and if we know any more on how that investigation is going. And then the other question that comes up frequently is just the whole evacuation planning and how you view the incident that in September and how you're looking at it going forward, and some of that after action review that Adam already made reference to. So if it's okay, Chief O'Meara, can I ask you about those two that folks have asked us about?
Yeah, of course. Happy to be here tonight. I respect very much and appreciate that people are hungry for information about the start of the Alameda fire. We are still working on it. We have a detective that spends the majority of his time working on it in conjunction with a detective from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. I hope that everyone can respect the fact that I can't really say a whole lot about it other than it is active on a day-to-day basis with our partner agencies. We have access to OSP and the Medford Police and the FBI as needed, and the FBI has been consulted on this case. The only thing that I can say is what I have said previously, that there is a human element to it. Beyond that, we can't say. There are leads that come in and get worked, and again, I hope everybody respects that we're not going to divulge that, other than to say it's being worked on pretty much every day by 2 detectives at least, more as needed. And the evacuation, is there anything else I can try to say on that, Mayor Akins, before I move along? I know that that's not a lot, but I simply can't share a lot of info.
Well, I think that something is better than nothing, and it shows that the investigation is still ongoing. I think that answers it very well. Thank you, Chief.
All right, thank you. I remain exceedingly proud of the effort by all Jackson County and surrounding areas, law enforcement and firefighters and paramedics and first responders and public works employees and, ODOT, everybody did such a phenomenal job. We recently tallied up the number of people the number of law enforcement people that were involved in the evacuation in the first unfolding hours of the Alameda fire. Just to give it some context, Ashland normally has about 3 to 4 to 5 officers, or excuse me, 4 to 5 to 6 officers on duty. We were able to immediately put, between us and the surrounding agencies, 181 individual police resources into evacuating. And that happened seamlessly. It did not happen perfectly, and the communication was not perfect. I recognize that the traffic jam that went through Ashland from the diverted traffic off of I-5 presented a significant problem should another problem develop, and we're all very grateful that it didn't. So we're definitely going to learn some lessons about communicating with ODOT and communicating between the various disciplines a little bit better. We all did a good job, but we kind of did it independent of each other, more so than we should have. So we all made the right moves, but we didn't do it in concert with each other. So we'll learn from it and be better prepared next time. I don't know if somebody was looking for something more than that. Right now, we are looking forward to the evacuation study being returned to us, which should happen by the end of March. And that's going to be something for all of us to benefit from, not just the first responders and the city staff. So more to come on that in very short order.
Thank you very much. Do any counselors have any questions for the chief while he's here? And while you consider that, I'll also ask Elizabeth, who is taking questions from the public, if there are any that pertain to Chief O'Meara that we want to field his way. And I just really appreciate everyone being here and having a willingness toward this. I'm looking at the little squares. I'm not seeing any counselors who are interested in asking a question in this moment. So, Counselor Moran and Counselor Duquesne, go ahead, you guys. Go ahead and ask a question. And then
thank you, Your Honor. And thank you, Chief Ty. That was very interesting. Quick question on blocking off Interstate 5. Is that something that I would imagine goes beyond the purview of Ashland being able to determine that? Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. The way that happened, if memory serves, is that ODOT made the decision that I-5 had to be shut down at exit 14. And so I think it was at exit 14. I don't think it was 11. And so everybody started flowing in, and there could have been a little bit better communication about that happening. After that happened, we requested that I-5 be shut down at the state line, and that did happen at our request. Maybe it was going to happen anyway. So it was half ODOT, half us asking ODOT to do something for us.
Okay, because anyone who experienced that traffic jam it was really concerning with, vans packed with kids and then intertwined with 18-wheelers. It was really kind of spooky. So I think that's something that we have to get our head around and figure that out. So anyway, thank you very much.
And just a quick note on the road diet, and I get that there's some feelings on the road diet. One of the things I was thinking about is that when I was trying to navigate up and down 99 during the traffic jam, the only thing that allowed me to do so was the road diet, because people were in one lane going northbound and the turn lane coming south or in the middle. That was the only lane that was accessible for me trying to go northbound. And there were other emergency services that were relegated to that and that only at times. And so if not for that, statement of fact, we would have had emergency responders, lights and siren not going anywhere. So it's a very complicated situation, and it's not as easy as bring back more lanes and the problem's going to be solved. Just my observation.
And maybe add a couple of things to that, because that's a good point. And one of the things that was really unique, and that Scott Fleury, our Public Works Director, takes has the most consistent communication ongoing with ODOT, is that both 99 and I-5 were closed. So you could have 20 lanes going northbound on North Main, but there, for a short period, that was not an outlet. Which is why we talk about what are alternative outlets when it's, when both. And that's that's an ODOT question and a strategy question with all of us, is when both, because I-5 closed with the understanding at the time that 99 was open. That quickly changed also, so that altered their decision-making tree. And that's one interesting thing with the Jackson County EOC, the consultant study. The first, I believe, 72 hours are going to be all time stamped. So, it's a matter of what was known at the time decisions were made. Then conditions change and decisions have to change along with it. Then the other piece that I did learn, and Scott, if we need to, can clarify or add, is when anytime the decision is made to move a closure from 14 or 19 to the border or to past into Wairika, there's a 12 to 15 miles worth of traffic queued up that has to go somewhere, that has to get outletted. So that's another element of our coordination and work with ODOT about, once those decisions are made, what are we doing with that residual traffic that doesn't have another way to go? They can't turn around on I-5. They have to get off and reroute it. So there's some of those kind of fine tuning things that, if this happens, then this is our plan, those kind of things.
That's fascinating. I wonder if I know that Councillor Graham would want to say something, and Councillor Duquesne is queued up as well. But I want to give a quick opportunity for Public Works Director Scott Fleury to chime in here, since this is part of his area of influence, and you just mentioned him, Adam. So Scott, did you want to make a comment on this as well?
So I guess, in my post-event conversations with ODOT regarding kind of the closure and the timing of the closure, just to add in a little bit more information, ODOT never has an intent to close the I-5 down in a way that routes traffic through downtown on the 99, because they know the burden it generally functionally places on the transportation system. So based on the timing and the resource availability, when the decision was made to close at 14, there was no resources available to station the Tolman Creek intersection and start routing traffic back to Tolman, to Croce, or to Siskiyou Boulevard, and back down towards 11 north or southbound. So once resources were available to start rerouting that traffic in that condition, it eased up the burden in downtown. ODOT made that initial decision to close at 14, and right after that, they started to move up towards 1, and then eventually to Wairika to close further back. So it just takes time to process that. And, we know now better in a coordinated effort, like Chief Ty was saying, that we can proactively get to a location maybe faster. Public Works resources, police resources, we're all in that immediate evacuation area, assisting in that firefighting activity and the local evacuation. But we know in certain circumstances that we can adjust and, try to allocate resources to facilitate not having that traffic burden that occurred in downtown.
Sorry, thank you very much. I know that Councillor Graham is the liaison for the wildfire mitigation group, and is part of the research project that had a presentation. So I for sure want to get to you, but Councillor Duquesne had her hand up first. So if you want to go ahead, Councillor Duquesne, and then we'll have Councillor Graham.
No, asked and answered. Thank you.
Right, terrific. Councillor Graham.
Thank you. My question is for Scott. Has there been any discussion about the possibility of creating some sort of an interstate turnaround on either end of the valley, so that if in fact we had a fire situation in the valley, we could turn people around out on the interstate without bringing them into any city streets? And to kind of deal with that plug that you say, you end up with those folks on the road after you've closed it down. Is there any way for us to build, is there any infrastructure that could be built where we could turn people around and get them heading out of the valley before they really get in an emergency?
So I haven't talked with ODOT specifically about that. There exist turnaround points at numerous locations on the interstate that are breaks in the cable barriers that you see. The difficulty with turning around personal vehicles is not a problem. It's turning around semi and truck traffic, which makes up a significant majority of the traffic loading during times on the interstate. And so that's why they look to close at specific locations during emergency events that can facilitate truck turning movements, and one of the things that I mentioned previously was the turnaround there at Tolma Creek and sending people back down Siskiyou back on to the freeway southbound is kind of that City of Ashland nominal strategy until such time as that they can get it closed at one or in Wairika to not allow any traffic to come over the border into Oregon itself. The other thing that I've spoken with ODOT about is, and I think it was mentioned a little bit ago, is an emergency access to the interstate that could be used to send evacuation routing either northbound or southbound. And I think Adam Hanks mentioned it earlier. And so that's one of the things we're pursuing as a potential moving forward to provide just an emergency egress route out of the community. ODOT has these other egress points on the state system and other communities that are only used for emergency related purposes. So it is and can be a potential. And I think we're looking at right now the potential off of North Mountain and the overpass near North Mountain as an option. And for those of you who know the area, behind Skylark Assisted Living Facility, there's kind of a grade transition that makes it somewhat passable, I think, to build an emergency access point down to the I-5. And I've had that initial conversation with ODOT. There is also right there, that location, a break in the cable barrier. So you could end up routing vehicles northbound or southbound at that point, depending on the closure status of the freeway system itself. So I think these are all things that we have to take account into, and also understand, that this could be a regional evacuation with other communities needing to access and route as well, and how that affects the other communities. And so I think that communication between us regionally is going to be more important, as important as ever moving forward on evacuation strategies.
Okay, thank you very much for that answer. I want to get to some of the questions from folks who are here watching and participating in our audience. So it's really important they have a chance to speak. So Elizabeth, do you want to give us a few more questions? And we also have Chief Sartain here and Chris Chambers from Fire Department. I imagine some questions will be coming their way, but I'm not trying to steer you in any particular direction. If you could give us some more questions, that'd be great. Yes, City Manager Pro Tem Adam Hanks, you had something?
I'm just going to add that the one element that we were hoping to get to at some point within the Q&A is a slot for Chris and Katie to talk about kind of existing and planned programs that are active, individual residents' ability to take action to help themselves and the community too. So that's one element that we can float in wherever you want to fit it.
Absolutely. I don't want anyone's work to go in vain or any information to be missed. But I definitely want to keep that participation coming, since that's what we're all here to hear. So if you could give us a few more questions, Elizabeth.
Sure, I've grouped a few more. There were a few questions about water and water resources for the area. One was concerning, does the fire department or the first responders survey the area to see where water resources can be taken up by helicopter? And then also, is the city going to start strongly recommending, because I know we already recommend, or requiring water saving measures to help preserve our water shortages.
I'll just redirect that one over to Scott immediately.
So I can't answer the one about the fire resources specifically as far as water, but as far as conservation, of course, the city has a robust conservation program and always recommends water conservation. It is a supply strategy for the city's water system. And we do have a robust conservation program that the community can take advantage of. Numerous programs within that conservation program: indoor water audits, outdoor water audits, rebate programs. A lot of that information is posted on the city's website. If you go there, you'll find a lot of the background information on the city's water conservation program itself. And, you know, during fire season, the city is fortunate to have built up a significant amount of what I'd say resiliency in water supply options. Outside of Reeder Reservoir, the main supply, there's also the Talent Irrigation District supply that could potentially be used to supplement, and also the TAP supply can also be used to supplement for firefighting activities if needed.
And the question about, I think the other question, Elizabeth, is there water sources that we could tap into via helicopter or other source to fight fires? Is that was
correct?
The question?
Or has there been a survey done to see the different areas?
Would
Yeah,
anybody, would Chief Sartain or Scott, would anybody be able to answer that? Or is that not known?
I can answer it for you real quick. The Oregon Department of Forestry and the U.S. Forest Service has their helicopter pilots that go out, and they have predetermined areas that they can pick up and drop from. And it also depends on the type of helicopter, the size of the bucket, and the areas that they're able to pull the water from. So it's not something that the Ashland Fire Department does because we don't have air assets, but it is definitely something that the Oregon Department of Forestry and the U.S. Forest Service does take care of.
Very good,
And,
thank you.
and I you know, another interesting piece of that is, as we said, we recognized early on, the region did, that we didn't have many assets of those kind of assets because they were spread super thin. So it isn't always known, even when an event is occurring, what assets might show up. So that, as Chief Sartain said, that what shows up dictates where they might, you know, go and grab water resources. But you know, eventually we did get some additional resources, but those are, I think they were the whatever we can get, whenever we can get them sort of request.
Makes sense. Okay. Is it, with the forbearance of the group, is it okay if we take a few more questions and then is everybody good with that? And then we will pivot to Chris Chambers and Katie. A couple more questions for us, Elizabeth. I want to try to get as many of these answered as we can.
Sure, and there's actually a few on, I think, what Chris and Katie are going to cover, so I'll skip those for now. Let's see. In regards to the emergency broadcast system, do we know why the television stations, the radio stations didn't have a warning go out, or who is in charge of this and how we can change that in the future?
Chris, do you want to take a stab at that one for us?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So what the question is referring to is a system called iPause. iPause encompasses all of the emergency alerts, like the crawlers that go across a TV screen, the blaring message that comes across a radio station, and amongst all the wireless alerts like Amber Alerts. That has to be activated by the county because they're the holder of the iPause code. We can request to use it if that emergency is happening within our community. The fire exited Ashland so quickly, there wasn't any reason to do that for citizens of Ashland, but certainly there was for citizens of Talent and Phoenix and the rural areas. Why that happened will have to be addressed during the county's after action review. I honestly don't know why they didn't pull the plug on iPause and all the emergency alerts. But that will come out in their reporting.
All right, very good, thank you. One more question and then we'll go to the presentation on Firewise and what we can do at home.
Sure. Let's see. Let's go with the how does the airport contribute to our emergency response? Or does it?
We'll give that over to Scott.
So the Public Works is in charge of the Ashland Municipal Airport, and the airport has and will and continue to serve as a staging base for operations as required to support air assets. It was used in the Siskiyou complex fire off of Walker years ago. And so it can be used to stage emergency services vehicle, both ground fleet and air fleet, and has been used in that mechanism before and will continue to be used in that way.
Okay, terrific. We're going to just a quick time check. I think it's about 7:15, and we're pulling the plug at 8. So by the 8 o'clock hour, we will try to have most of your questions answered. And it bears repeating that the good folks at the city are going to take all questions that weren't answered and do a FAQ and some other ways of making sure that your questions are answered. And of course, this isn't the last time we'll speak. You guys know where to reach us. So we're always here for you. But I will kick it back to Adam then for the next portion in terms of presentation. And want to just also send another invitation to all of the department heads here and council members. If you have any question at any point, shoot me a chat or raise your hand and we'll make sure you are recognized. Go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, thank you. This is the part that we really wanted to be action oriented and focused on what residents and businesses, mostly on the resident side, can do to increase the fire safety of their own home and neighborhood. And just, Chris and Katie will go through all of that. I would say that just a preface, and they'll probably get into it too, the Wildfire Safety Commission plays an important role in advising the council on the policy level stuff, and also plays a really strong role in being a resource for Chris and Katie on these programming efforts. And the last plug before I turn it over is Chris and Katie both have been excellent at searching out and applying for and securing grant funds to do this, that extend our abilities to do this beyond our local, general fund monies. So that's an essential part to move us forward, is to look at any and all external funding sources available, and they've been stellar at grabbing those. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris and kick off this part of the program.
Thanks, Adam. Katie's going to start screen sharing. Good, that's working. I just want to mention, and I don't know if any of the other presenters were aware, I've gotten some texts that people were being turned away from getting onto the Zoom, and apparently there's a 100-person limit. So the people who are here aren't hearing this, or the people who are not here aren't hearing this. But if you are listening, and there's other people that you're talking to or texting with that are frustrated, we apologize that we hit a limit on the meeting that we didn't know about beforehand. But it will be posted on the web. Everybody can watch it at their own leisure at a later date. Okay, that done. I want to preface my part of the presentation here by acknowledging and honoring the Aboriginal people on whose ancestral homelands we work. Here in Ashland. Tribes with ancestral lands in and around Ashland included original, past, present, and future indigenous inhabitants of the Shasta, Tacoma, Athabascan people, including Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, Siletz, Cow Creek Band of Umpqua, Shasta Nation, and Klamath tribes. And that's important for what I'm going to talk about specifically, because for many, many thousands of years, people lived here in Ashland, before it was called Ashland, obviously, and managed and stewarded the natural resources in this ecosystem. And unfortunately for us, in 150 short years, we have turned that ecosystem and this place on its head, and unfortunately not for the positive. And we're going to talk about our ongoing work, both on the forests surrounding Ashland and as they bleed into town on city lands that are integrated within our urban core and the surrounding areas, and what we're doing to to address the flammable nature of our town that has been built in this beautiful but very fire adapted landscape. Fires here in the Ashland area burned, according to tree ring analysis and research, every 2 years in some places. Many of those fires were lit by the tribal peoples themselves as a way of managing resources and providing safety for themselves. And lightning, of course, was starting many fires as well. So the ecosystem, our forests are highly altered. They're really upside down in terms of how many trees we have out there and what kinds of trees. We're working to get that into a more sustainable spot. I'll talk a little bit about that. And again, of course, how to protect our own community, and not the least of which is using proactive fire. So you see the websites you can go to: Fire Adapted Ashland, Smokewise Ashland, and ashlandwatershed.org. We'll refer to all those. All right, Katie, next. So one of the first things that we've been doing over many years is managing our own city and parks forest lands. The city, as a municipal owner with the Parks Commission, it owns about 1,100 acres of forest lands in and around the city. The area is highlighted in green in the background map. And since the early 90s, there's been proactive work to reduce fire danger across that entire landscape of city ownership. This year, we have 200 acres of wildfire safety work in progress at the moment, including controlled burning that's planned before the upcoming fire season. Go ahead, Katie. One of the really cutting edge things that's going on in the Forest Lands Commission right now is creating a plan to adapt our forests to climate change. So this is addressing that 1,100 acres, but it will be illustrative to take those results and think about what we would do on the greater Ashland watershed surrounding town on 50,000 plus acres. So this is being worked on at the this very moment in the Forest Lands Commission and by our consultant, Marty Main, and also complements the city's Climate Energy Action Plan and the 2016 Ashland Forest Plan. So when you see work happening out there along trails, these are the plans and the infrastructure that governs that. It's funded through the city, actually out of the water fund, to manage these lands, and they're so important for the safety of our town and our watershed. Okay. One of the major pieces of work that's happened over the past 10 years is the Ashland Forest Resiliency Project. This project started in planning phase back in 2004, when the city submitted a community wildfire protection plan with an option for what the city wanted done in the Ashland watershed. There was a lot of consternation and disagreement over where management in the watershed was going. There were some pretty heavy-handed tactics that had been proposed, and Ashland Forest Resiliency was actually a product of the citizens of Ashland, brought to the Forest Service, and has largely been implemented as submitted to the Forest Service, and implemented in a partnership with the Forest Service itself, the city, Lomacotsi Restoration Project, and the Nature Conservancy. There's a lot that goes on in AFR. If you've been looking up in the hills the past week, you've seen smoke billowing out. That's part of our controlled burning. Again, trying to reestablish a balance in our forests that's been long absent over the past 150 plus years, where we used to have that regular fire that cleaned the forest and helped manage it. Fire applied really diligently with a lot of knowledge and experience by Native peoples. And in the absence of that, the conditions have changed dramatically. And we do have a high fire danger, though it is getting better every day that we're able to do these projects up in the forest, doing them responsibly in an ecologically informed way, monitoring those projects to see that the results are meeting our goals, and involving the community. Well, we've had many public tours, well over 50, to involve citizens. We have a monitoring team that incorporates local organizations, and we involve school children all the way through K to 12, as well as SOU students in the work that we do in the watershed. So it's not only making our community healthier and safer, but also providing an educational opportunity for students across the board. Somewhat incredibly, the AFR project, Adam mentioned bringing in funds externally. We've been able to garner over $25 million of funding for this project over the past 10 plus years in order to make AFR go. Part of that is contributed by the city itself. If you look on your water bill, there is actually a small line item that everybody in Ashland with a water hookup pays about $3 per month toward the work happening to make our forests safer, healthier, and to protect our community from what is indeed bad fire. So we're just to be aware that you will see smoke, and we need to continue to push the envelope using controlled burning ahead of the summer fire seasons, as we know that climate change is pushing this to a hotter and drier and more fire-prone climate. All right, Katie. One of the really cool things that we've done just recently in the past 2 months is strategic fire planning. This is an effort that's nationwide in scope, although we've managed to focus it on our very small community and our watershed, encompassing 52,000 acres in our planning area in the white outline. It's really exciting to have this much data and engage this process with Oregon State University and the Forest Service's research station. And a lot of smart people are doing work that we don't have the capacity or the intelligence to put together, but we have a lot of PhDs looking at this and telling us essentially where we need to go to be the most effective, both in the work that we do in fire prevention and forest restoration, as well as when the fire alarm goes off, where are our opportunities on this landscape to control a developing fire. This is primarily focused on a forested landscape, so we don't get into where the Alameda fire burned in riparian vegetation, although that is certainly a need in the future, but the research and the application of it is being rolled out across forested landscapes. So it's an exciting time. We're actually already using this to do our spring burn planning for this season. As I mentioned, smoke is a big part of life here, as we all know. Unfortunately, with many smoky summers behind us now, I wish I could say that it was going to get better in the near future, but I want to prepare people for reality. The reality is, as climate is changing, and it has been changing, research says we've doubled our acres burned since the 90s. As climate change. So we're going to continue that trend. What we do now really matters for how the fire is going to interact with our watershed, our forests, with habitat, with our community. And again, using fire proactively is one of the most important tools that we have in order to get ahead of this issue. The amount of smoke that we create during controlled burning pales in comparison to the amount of smoke that comes out during wildfires. And still, it is really important to reflect that smoke is not good for anybody, and so we need to avoid it as much as we can. So these short duration smoke events that we create when we do prescribed burning, many of them people don't even notice in town. They're up on the hill. It's been going on this whole week, and there's been a little bit of haze, but if you look at their quality index, it didn't change much this week in town. But there will be days where it does, and we're trying to prepare the community for that. We created the SmokeWise Ashland website in conjunction with the Ashland Chamber of Commerce and other partners. Back in 2017, it started. It was rolled out in 2018. It's a great resource that focuses and brings in a lot of information in one spot. It's easy to use. You can check the air quality index. You can get information about smoke and health, see how to protect your indoor air quality. There's resources for businesses, and then ways to sign up to get more information about controlled burns. And it's been incredibly popular during the summer when we've had the extended smoke episodes, but it's also equally targeted for our controlled burn times of the year. And that we're going to accelerate in our burn program through the beginning of fire season when it'll shut off. Part of that is the community smoke response plan that was just crafted. that passed through the city council. And as a result, we were able to secure funding to put out 600 HEPA air purifiers at no cost to the community. So people can have those in their living rooms, in their bedrooms to turn on when there's smoky skies, whether it's from burning or it's from wildfires during the summer. It's the same prevention, and having these is really important. We targeted that to the neediest people economically and health-wise in Ashland, and those are happily residing in homes across the community right now. If you want information about our burn programs, you can get on a text-specific string to find out when burn days are happening, and you do that by texting the word watershed as the subject to 888-777 as the recipient, and it'll automatically sign you up for burn alerts. So if you know you're smoke sensitive, you want to get on that list and know when burning is happening, and we can further inform you if it's going to affect the community or not. That's just kind of touching the tip of the iceberg of some of our forest related programs and work. Katie's going to talk about what we do to protect the community itself. And these things are integrated. They don't live in different worlds. They overlap a lot. So I will let her take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, so sort of shifting gears here, but all within the same realm. We mentioned the SmokeWise Ashland one-stop shop. And very similarly within my program as the Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator, within the past year, we've developed a website called Fire Adapted Ashland. So you can visit that website right now. And it is our one-stop shop for all things wildfire. Some of the top visitations that we have on that website are pointing to things like what are our fire-wise or fire-resistant plant recommendations within the city. We also point a lot of our builders and landscapers to this site to refer to our wildfire safety ordinance information. And then in terms of steering to the public, what educational resources and videos are available out there, all of those are placed in one location. So I highly recommend everyone check out that site if you haven't heard of it already. Speaking of the wildfire safety ordinance, the city of Ashland, hopefully everyone is well versed or at least recognizes that we have several wildfire safety ordinance in place in order to protect the community from wildfire. So one of the questions that was brought up in the Q&A section was asking about weed abatement. So we do have a weed abatement ordinance that requires that you cut back your dry grass or weeds by June 15th. So that's something that we have every year, and we have a weed abatement officer who goes out and educates the public on what that looks like for their individual property, and also enforces that ordinance as necessary. In 2018, the city adopted the Wildfire Safety Ordinance, which has several really unique components. Ashland was sort of a paver of the way of some of this ordinance related to wildfire safety, which includes ordinance on new development and additions to both individual structures and entire subdivisions that require certain defensible space measures. So we do have a prohibited flammable plants list that prohibits the planting of certain flammable plants within the first 5 feet of new construction or additions. It also prohibits flammable fence connections within the first 5 feet of homes. Both of those items, flammable plants and fence connections, were seen as common denominators in terms of the ability of fire to spread in the Alameda fire. And so we're proud to be ahead of the curve on enforcing those types of things to limit fire spread in our community. Many of you, in fact, the entire public, received a postcard back at the beginning of July pointing citizens to the My Home portal. Back in 2018 and 2019, a couple of fire department staff went home to home from the curbside and did a rapid wildfire risk assessment of every home in Ashland. All of that data was compiled. We did a large data analysis throughout the entire community, looking at extra things like how close is your home to your neighbors? Does their risk influence yours? what is the ability of embers to spread from the wildlands to your specific property, and placed all of that information into an individual portal. So if you do not recall getting a postcard, but are interested to know more about your wildfire safety risk, you can just go to fireadaptedashland.org, and you'll quickly find a link that points you to an email that I manage that can provide you information about your specific wildfire risk. Every year, the Wildfire Safety Commission for the past 3 years puts on a wildfire safety campaign. And so right now with the commission, we are really winding up on, or I should say gearing up for our 4-month campaign. So you can follow along on our Fire Adapted Ashland website. Each month has a specific theme sort of catered to what you really need to be thinking about each month, from April through the end of July. So we're really pushing this April to begin thinking about embers. What can you do within the first 5 feet of your home and around your structure to stop embers from igniting the structure and igniting the material that's directly around your home? And that's because over 90% of wildfires that spread through communities are spread by embers, not by flame. So anything that can be ignited by embers is something we're really pushing in this campaign. Something that our community loves, that all of you Ashlanders absolutely love, is our green debris drop-off day. So this year we're implementing our 10th annual green debris drop-off day, and we could not do this without the partnership and excitement of our local transfer station with Recology. So we're just very appreciative that every year they're willing to host us to help all of you dispose of your flammable green debris in the community. So we're here announcing this today that our 10th annual green debris drop-off day is going to be on May 2nd. And you can jump on to Fire Adapted Ashland to see the exact timing and restrictions on what you can bring into Recology for that event. And now we're going to jump into some new and expanded efforts that are taking place in the community, building off of what we experienced in the Alameda fire, and also taking advantage of several grants that the Wildfire Division has been able to acquire since the Alameda fire. So I'll toss it back over to Chris for a little bit.
One thing that's coming up this next week at City Council is a presentation from our Community Development Department, supported by the Fire Department, to adopt the Oregon's Wildfire Building Code. The code that Katie previously mentioned addresses new construction in the vegetation on the lot and a couple of construction elements, mainly the roof and the fence. But this is a comprehensive building code chapter that was adopted at the state level, in no small part due to our then Fire Marshal Ralph Sartain, now chief, to get this passed as an option for local jurisdictions like the city of Ashland to adopt this in their own communities, to govern the construction materials and techniques for all new construction. And that's an important one, that we get ahead of the game and we don't keep building structures that are susceptible to wildfires. So this is going to be coming to council. The first meeting is next week, and then subsequently to talk about the adoption. Next. One thing that Adam mentioned is this interdepartmental vegetation management team. This is directly as a result of the Alameda fire. We saw how rapidly the fire spread through blackberries along the Bear Creek corridor. An invasive species, one that, although it does have some habitat characteristics, it's not native. And there's a lot better native vegetation out there that we can favor and perhaps replant as well. As a result of this, we actually were able to identify that the city does 151 acres of mowing and cutting fuel breaks across city-owned property in the community every year. That's been going on for decades, and including the area where the Alameda fire started, which was mowed very close to the ground, and it's just reflects on the severity of the weather that day. That where it started, it was able to blow quickly across the stubble and down into the greenway. But nonetheless, there are still about 80 acres of land that we don't do work on, and almost all of that is in these riparian areas along creek sides, and it's almost all dealing with Himalayan blackberry. We actually started work in one first area near the BMX park today. Ashland Parks Commission staff were out there doing some work, and we're going to sign a contract this week with a contractor that's going to help us to get a handle on that remaining 80 acres. Not all of it will happen this year, but we're going to hit the priority areas, primarily the North Mountain area, Riverwalk, and then also surrounding the dog park and Verde Village are the two really big spots that need a lot of work. And the citizens that live there are well aware of it, as are we. So they should expect to see some changes coming really quickly before May 1st, when we're going to have to put down our tools in favor of habitat. Okay, next.
Hey, Chris, can I ask, do you think you'll be wrapped up in about 5 minutes? I want to leave the last 15 for questions and answers. Is that good with you?
Yeah, indeed. Katie's back up, so she'll cruise through this last part.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll cruise right through. So a couple of plugs we want to make to the public today, and also counselors that are listening in, please spread this through your networks. The more information that we get out there, the better. So the first being that through a grant we received from the Oregon Department of Forestry, the city received funding to fund at least 20 green debris bins for neighborhoods. So we're encouraging residents to gather together with your neighborhood, identify flammable vegetation within your neighborhood, and get together and apply for one of these bins. So if you go on to fireadaptedashland.org/wildfire prep, you'll see the icons at the bottom of the page that are displayed here. Click on apply for a green debris bin and apply for one of those bins. We're really optimistic that we'll get a lot of green debris out of the community that way. So please apply. We're also excited to be announcing a wildfire risk assessment program. So basically, one of my favorite parts of this job is I get to go to individual households and talk to residents one-on-one for about an hour about their wildfire risk in the community, or as it relates to their individual property. So on an annual basis, I conduct somewhere between 100 and 150 assessments a year. And the social science has proven that one-on-one interaction is the top way to get residents to take action to reduce wildfire risk on their individual property. And so we are working on developing a volunteer training program to train people to do those one-on-one assessments that I do out in the field. It's going to be a really rigorous program, but we're really excited about the ability to get more boots on the ground talking to individual residents. So if you're interested, again, see that icon on fireadaptedashland.org/wildfire prep. If you're interested in being one of those volunteers, please submit a pre-application and we'll be sending you more information in the coming weeks. Really quickly, I'll hit on a program we launched about a year ago, which is our real estate wildfire education program. We teamed up with the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors to provide education to realtors on wildfire history, wildfire preparedness, and most importantly, the wildfire preparedness programs that we have in the community of Ashland. So to be in a fire adapted community, it's all hands on deck, and our realtors are often a first face to new members of our community. And so educating them on the basics of wildfire programs in our community is really important. Lastly, many of you have probably heard many times over about the Fema grant that the city of Ashland applied for back in 2018 that would fund defensible space around the top 1,100 at-risk homes in Ashland. How we determine that risk goes back to that My Home portal that I talked about 10 minutes ago, where we did a curbside risk assessment of every home in Ashland. We are in the last stages of accepting that grant through FEMA, and we're hoping to begin reaching out to community members in May if they are eligible to receive these funds. So don't call us, we'll call you on that program. And we'll also be able to replace or fund the replacement of the last remaining 25 to 30 wood shake roofs that exist in Ashland, because that's a common spreader of fire. And before we actually go to Q&A, Chris and I really wanted to encourage, this is our interface with the public, with you all right now on what are the things that you need to be doing before fire season to prepare your home for fire. And so we have really 5 quick to-dos that I want to run through really quick. The first being remove as much bark mulch from your property as you can, with an emphasis on the first 5 feet around your home. As you can see in this image, bark mulch just smolders. Long after a fire has passed, embers that have ignited bark mulch are going to spread fire and may lead to the loss of a home long after that fire has passed. To help do that, rake and sweep leaves and needle litter from your decks, from above on your gutters and your roof, and again within the first 5 feet of the home, because those are the kindling for embers to ultimately ignite your property. Remove flammable vegetation within the first 5 feet of your home. Some really common offenders photographed here, mugo pine, as well as arborvitae and juniper. All of those are just really resinous and very flammable. So please remove them and then take them to green debris drop-off day on May 2nd. And know your individual evacuation plan. Many of you probably thought, as the Alameda fire was occurring, what should I have had gathered together to evacuate in a moment's notice? So that's part of understanding your evacuation plan. Another thing is, please practice the individual routes out of your driveway. How do you get out of town to the north? How do you get out of town to the south? Practice those for yourself. And last but not least, we'll push it again and we'll keep pushing it. Please sign up for Nixle. There are multiple ways you can do it. If you're a texter, you can text 97520 to 888-777. You can sign up online. We've got a website for that. And please, if you have not signed up, please do so, because that's the top way that we'll be able to get to you at a moment's notice in an emergency. And if you're a business, encourage your employees to sign up as well. So with that,
All right.
we'll leave it off.
Okay, thank you very much for your thorough and enjoyable presentation. And I know people will have questions and probably be hitting you up. Councillor Stephanie Seffinger wants to point out, since we're talking about planting, that pollinator plants and drought tolerant planting is included in the plant list. So, you know, I don't know, Stephanie, if you wanted to say more on that, but I open the floor to you if you would like to. Let me see if I can get into a different screen here so I can see better. There you are. Did you want to say anything more about that?
I just wanted to say that the wildfire committee looked at protecting the environment in a lot of different ways when they made the suggestions they did about preventing fire. They also looked at drought tolerance and the pollinator needs of our bees with plants that try to be included, and let people know about those.
Thank you very much. Important to bring that up. I wanted we are down to our last 15 minutes, 14 actually, and I wanted to make sure that we got as many questions answered as possible. I see a lot of questions around, okay, great, when are you guys going to do this? Are we going to be ready for fire season? You know, what, are you hearing us? What are we doing? And will we meet deadlines? And that's kind of always where we all come from. So Elizabeth, if you want to ask a few of those, and then we can kick those over to the appropriate people. And I also see that Mike Morrison is here and hasn't spoken. So I don't know if there's something specific you'd like to say to our viewers and listeners and participants today. But I'll give it to you right now, Elizabeth.
Okay, I think I looked at those questions and I think I can summarize it down to, if the coordinated plan with the regional partners, so the county and the other cities, will be completed before this fire season.
Okay. Adam, do you want to grab that?
Probably the short answer is no. You know, those are a lot of pieces. There's a lot of pieces that will be, you know, done, and it's really a continuous. A lot of the planning efforts that we do, of course, aren't bound by fire season. We work on them 12 months a year, and you know, different agencies have different pace and different resources and different staffing levels to contribute to that effort. So, you know, the after action review from Jackson County almost assuredly won't be complete and distributed prior to fire season. We will be working our tails off on some of the fuels reduction work that was talked about for the city lands. So there are many elements that we will push through until fire season, and then we'll switch gears into kind of planning and preparedness, communications, education, all those things that we can do during fire season, and of course awareness of protections that we need to make on event days, red flag days, etc. But I saw Ty's hand up, so throw it over and augment or correct me.
Augment or compliment or not corrector. I just want to reiterate that the evacuation study that we contracted to receive will be in our hands by the end of March. And I want to enlist either Chris Chambers or Ralph Sartain on this, but I imagine that the Know Your Zone campaign will be coming along in pretty short order. So there will be a piece, an important piece in place pretty quickly here that we are doing on our own.
Ralph, Chief Sartain, did you want to speak to that as well? Thank you so much, Chief O'Meara, for that information. Very reassuring.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. Like Chief O'Meara said, is we will have this out, and part of our grant was a campaign for getting information out. We did meet Aaron Ott, who is now the emergency manager for the city of Medford, is also building a evacuation plan that's starting with Medford, kind of working out. So we want our program to run in concurrence with Medford is building a regional program for evacuation. But we will get the zones broke down. I'm pretty sure that's what the report's going to come out. We're going to start getting some signage up, work with the city and get information before council, get it out to our community. I'm not sure how much we can get done realistically before fire season kicks off, but at least getting flyers out, getting information in our water bills, getting information on our website. We'll get as much information possibly that we can to the community so that they'll have that availability.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I imagine it's also incumbent on everybody who's here, as soon as that information comes out, to share it through our networks. I'm looking to see if there's any other hands up here before I don't see any. Elizabeth, do you have any other questions that look to be important for us to answer before we wrap up out of this meeting?
Sure, let's see. There was one directed at the city council's next step. I don't know if any of the council would like to speak to it, but essentially taking what you've learned from the survey, what are the kind of next steps going forward, and how are you taking into consideration citizens' input from that?
That's a good question. I mean, I can answer from my perspective just off the top of my head, but I think it's important for council as a whole, as directed by staff, to kind of take all of the information that the questions we've heard and the information that we've gathered and try to form policy around it. I think that certainly, what Chief O'Meara and Chief Sartain said have to be among the top lists. Like, if something goes wrong, how do we get out of town? How do we get everyone out safely? And I think that's been everybody's priority. And I have no doubt we'll be adopting that. Adam, did you want to speak to that in terms of timelines, when this will come before council, and maybe just sort of give us a sense of like, what are the top 3 or top 5 things we'll be tackling here in short order?
Well,
the spot there, sorry.
No, it's okay. Chris mentioned the one of the building code item that's coming real soon, like next study session. So Monday, you'd be looking at that, and we've talked about it a little bit before. That one has there's some ordinance, timing to get that in place. That's an important one. I think it's a great, solid one. From a council perspective, the evacuation study for sure is right, kind of on the heels of that. I think concurrent to all this conversation, which is, always a challenge, and maybe more of a challenge this go round than past, is the budget process. How we, what the dials we can turn or really accelerate work in this area is somewhat dependent upon, resource decisions and resource allocations and availability of resources to do this work. And so, that's a backdrop for this topic. that's a backdrop for our climate action work. That's a backdrop for kind of our core services work is that budget process. So, that will be intertwined as we spend time with the budget committee and then purely to council on the budgeting and the resources. Probably the next down, like you say, the top 5 would be what we bring back to council as our piece or our takeaways from the Jackson County EOC. I don't know exactly how that will look in terms of presentation. Will we be, invited in? Is there a Zoom meeting for all elected officials throughout the region? I don't know how that's going to lay out. So we'll be monitoring that. And as I mentioned, the county administrator, Danny Jordan, has been great about keeping us apprised of that and participating in that. So I think that one's an important piece for council to see how does the city fit into the larger regional emergency management system, and where do we see our need to really voice our concerns or our advocacy within that structure more than other elements. And I think we'll get a sense of that here this summer.
Can I jump in and ask this one question that's burning a hole in my head right now? It's this whole Nixle thing that we were talking about, and when Tina Gray kicked off this meeting, she talked about the survey out to folks, and I'm curious, is there any other option, or do we just need to do a better job of getting everybody on it, or what's your thoughts on that?
I might have Chris chime in on this too. We spent a lot of time talking. One of the roles that Chris plays for us in the EOC, and even I steal his time outside of the EOC for public information officer, and he's excellent at it, and has really been our Nixle kind of go-to, and we need to expand that. We need to have proficiency, by more people. But there are other layers that are beyond. We use Nixle for us, for our part, and as that survey results that Tina provided, there were probably a dozen items listed as where people were getting information. Interestingly enough to me, the primary resource that was used by the State Fire Marshal's Office, PIO, was Facebook, which again has great reach, but also different limitations. So it's really a suite of tools that we need to be looking at, and how do we keep feeding those, throughout events, and those take people resources to feed those systems, and what kind of lag do we have between the information on the ground over to the people that are responsible for posting that information. And again, like I mentioned earlier, whose information is it? Who owns it? What authorizations occur before they're released or legally able to be released by other agencies? So, Chris, I don't know, any Nixle or beyond comments to add?
I think you covered most of it. We just need to be a little bit more precise with our Nixle use. And we're going to assemble a team inside the city to come up with more strict protocols about how we let those messages out, and then and know that Nixle also, and we did this during the Alameda fire, where we sent well over a dozen messages through Nixle as emergency, the highest priority messages, but they also reach landline phones. And a lot of people are worried about turning your phone off or on silent during the nighttime, which is, certainly legitimate to be concerned about. What if we need to evacuate people in the middle of the night and people have their phones off? Well, the iPause thing I mentioned earlier, if your phone is just on silent, it will activate your phone to give you an alert, even if it's on silent. But also having a landline, which is, I know, not so much in style these days. And I have one myself, and it is not cheap to keep maintaining it. But at the same time, that landline number is pretty important for emergency notifications. You can even get one of those old style phones that can ring without the power on if you really are concerned about being notified in the middle of the night. But yeah, yes. So kind of the answer to that is yes, we do need to double down on Nixle, get even more people enrolled in it, and certainly be ready to pull the plug on the iPause function which unlocks a lot more than just the amber alerts. And if we find ourselves in that situation, we want to be able to do that at a moment's notice.
One thing I'll add real quick on the Nixle stuff is, and I'm guilty of this as well. You know, you do the text thing to get logged in, you get your text messages, but you can go on and customize your account. So once you get in the system, you can go to the website and actually do a little more configuration if you are looking to add different notification levels. So it is a robust system, and so we want to make sure we're proficient on the back end side of how we utilize the different layers and system elements to getting the word out. But it's also important to know that that there is some control mechanisms and different setups available on the user side.
I think that's really important, and people can do that by going to the city's website, ashland.or.us/Nixle, Nixle, to set up those preferences and make an account, because that way you can get repetitive messages, enter multiple phone numbers, emails, so you have a better chance of getting the message. There's also an app associated with Nixle. The parent company, Everbridge, has an app, and it's just the Everbridge app on the app stores. And notifications can come through the app to your phone as well as text. If it's an emergency, true emergency alert, it will go out through all of the communication channels. If it's less than an emergency, the Nixle and Everbridge are trying to push people to get those notifications via the Everbridge app. We're going to do a big push for that during our spring campaign, so information will go out into the community. Probably people will get tired of it by the time we get done with the campaign this year, but we want to make sure we get that message far and wide.
Understood. Thank you very much. So we're pretty much at the end here. It's 8 o'clock and we promised 2 hours for this meeting. And I feel regretful because I don't know that we've gotten to every question, although Elizabeth Taylor deserves credit for doing a fantastic job. Thank you so much for monitoring all those questions and bringing them to us. And certainly there will be more in the future. This is just the first, not the last. There'll be many more conversations, and everybody you see here is working really hard to do everything we can to make sure that we are safe in case of another fire. Everybody lives here and we care about it too. So keep sending questions our way, and City Manager Pro Tem Adam Hanks has been really clear that we'll be answering these questions and providing FAQs. So keep the contact and communication coming. And I'll just open it up if anybody has any final thoughts before we say goodnight. Do anyone else want to put a button on this, or you want me to do it? Yes, Stephanie.
I just wanted to be sure that people know it's important. You asked what the council could do, to know how to make Ashland affordable and at the same time do the adaptation and prevention that we need. Those are two parts of the budget, and they're important to consider both of those things.
Well said. Here, here. Agree. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay, I'm looking around the room. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you for those folks who participated, and please jump on the city website and look for the resources and more information as we go forward. We've appreciated your input, and we'll take it and run with it. Thank you so much. Have yourself a pleasant evening. Appreciate it. Good night.